Have you ever found yourself holding on to a relationship long after it stopped serving your happiness, hoping that love could somehow fix everything, even when your dignity was slowly slipping away? This isn't just a story about heartbreak. It's a powerful reflection on what it means to age with self-respect, to reclaim our worth after decades of giving, and to finally put ourselves first. As we grow older, many of us seek connection more than ever. The silence of an empty home can be deafening, and the promise of companionship, especially one that feels exciting or youthful, can seem like a second chance at life. But sometimes that promise hides something far more dangerous: the erosion of our self-worth. In this video, we'll follow the journey of a man who, like many, fell into the trap of believing love meant sacrifice, even at the cost of his peace. What began as a dream turned into a slow unraveling of his confidence. But what makes his story remarkable isn't the pain. It's the courage he found to walk away, to stand tall, and to love himself again. This is not just another cautionary tale. It's a mirror for anyone who has ever questioned, do I still matter? By the end of this video, you'll be reminded that aging doesn't mean fading. It means refining. It's not about proving your worth to others. It's about finally recognizing it for yourself. Stay with me. The lessons ahead might just change the way you see love, solitude, and your own beautiful story. 1. A sweet beginning wrapped in illusion. In the beginning, everything felt magical. After years of living with routine and responsibility, he felt as though life had handed him a second chance at romance. The woman who entered his life seemed to radiate warmth, admiration, and youthful energy. She called him strong, wise, and charming, words he hadn't heard in what felt like decades. It was as if she saw through the aging exterior and into the heart of the man he once was. But here's the truth many older adults know all too well. Not every compliment is rooted in sincerity. Sometimes admiration is a tool used to draw someone in, especially someone craving connection. Her attention sparked something inside him. For a man in his 70s, being told he was desirable again felt like stepping back in time. He smiled more. He dressed better. He even walked with a little more pride. That's the power of feeling seen. But while the emotions were real, the foundation was not. What he mistook for genuine love may have been infatuation built on performance, his willingness to please, her skill in saying the right things. In a society that often makes older people feel invisible, this illusion can be dangerously persuasive. Many in their later years yearn to feel alive again, to be desired not just for their wisdom, but for their presence. But here's the hard lesson. When love is built on flattery without substance, it rarely ends well. That sweet beginning? It was intoxicating, but deceptive. And as we'll soon see, what starts with validation can turn into manipulation if we don't stay grounded in who we truly are. 2. Subtle signs of manipulation begin to emerge. What often begins with flattery can quietly shift into something far more unsettling. At first, her remarks came off as casual suggestions, little nudges about his diet, his posture, his pace. You should really take better care of yourself, she'd say, with a tone that felt almost helpful until it didn't. These weren't the loving, thoughtful observations of a partner. They were disguised criticisms, tiny pinpricks that chipped away at his confidence. It's a tactic older adults may recognize, when advice stops being supportive and starts sounding like judgment. He brushed them off at first, telling himself she meant well, but over time her tone grew sharper. What had once been admiration now came laced with superiority. She reminded him, subtly at first and then more boldly, that he was older, too old for certain things. And not just physically, but mentally, emotionally, romantically. Comments like, "You're not as quick as you used to be," or "maybe someone your age shouldn't try that," began to echo louder. For someone in their golden years, these remarks don't just sting, they linger, because aging already comes with its own doubts. To hear them reinforced by someone you love is deeply damaging. The manipulation wasn't obvious. That's what made it effective. She'd sprinkle in just enough affection to make him question whether he was being too sensitive. But deep down, he knew something wasn't right. This is how emotional control often works, especially in relationships where one partner feels vulnerable. It's not yelling or threats, it's erosion, a slow wearing down of self-worth. And for older adults, the most dangerous kind of manipulation is the one that looks like love, but feels like quiet humiliation. Recognizing it early is the first step toward reclaiming your power. 3. Deep wounds in intimate connection. For many older adults, physical closeness in a relationship isn't just about passion. It's about emotional reassurance, shared vulnerability, and the quiet comfort of being truly accepted. That's what he longed for. But instead of intimacy becoming a source of healing, it turned into a place of pain. As their relationship deepened, so did the criticisms. But this time, they reached into the most private corners of his being. Remarks about his performance, his pace, even his body weren't just cruel. They were humiliating. She compared him to younger men, implying he could never measure up. These weren't just offhand comments. They struck at the heart of who he was. For someone who had once taken pride in his ability to love with tenderness and devotion, these remarks weren't about physical shortcomings. They were emotional betrayals. When intimacy becomes a tool of comparison and judgment rather than connection, it erodes trust faster than any argument. What's worse, she would occasionally dangle just enough praise, telling him how attentive he was, how gentle and caring. But these moments felt less like affection and more like bait to keep him trying harder, giving more, proving his worth over and over again. Sadly, many older individuals fall into this trap, believing they must earn love through effort, even when it's laced with pain. They confuse endurance with commitment and silence with strength. But real intimacy should never leave you feeling ashamed or inadequate. It should be a place where both people feel safe, valued, and seen. When that space becomes toxic, it's not love. It's manipulation wearing the mask of closeness. And sometimes the deepest wounds aren't the ones others see, but the ones we carry silently behind closed bedroom doors. 4. The awakening. Reflecting and recognizing the harm. It often takes a moment of stillness, a quiet evening, a heavy sigh, a long look in the mirror, for the truth to finally break through. That moment came to him not with drama, but with silence. After yet another painful exchange, he sat alone in his room, the weight of her words echoing in the stillness. Looking into his own eyes, he didn't see a man who had failed. He saw a man who had given patience, tenderness, forgiveness, and time. And yet, what he got in return was a growing void inside him. That's when it struck him. He wasn't just aging, he was disappearing. This wasn't about a bad week or a personality clash. This was about slowly being erased by someone who couldn't see his value. And worse, he had allowed it, hoping love would somehow justify the hurt. Many older adults can relate. After a lifetime of compromise, we sometimes don't realize how much of ourselves we've given up, until what's left feels unfamiliar. But aging shouldn't mean losing your voice or dignity. It should mean leaning into hard-won wisdom, not shrinking to fit someone else's vision of who you should be. In that quiet moment, he realized something radical. Self-love isn't vanity, it's survival. Respect for yourself must come before affection from someone else. If love demands that you diminish who you are, it's not love. It's dependency dressed up as devotion. That was his turning point. Not with shouting or blame, but with clarity. He didn't need to fight for her approval anymore. He needed to fight for himself, for the man who had weathered storms and deserved peace, not punishment. Sometimes awakening doesn't come in the form of change, but in the courage to finally see clearly. 5. The breakup decision, a defining turning point. Ending a relationship in your later years isn't just about closing a chapter, it's about reclaiming your story. After months of emotional bruising, quiet humiliation, and second-guessing his worth, he reached a point where continuing wasn't strength, it was surrender, and he had surrendered enough. With a steadiness that surprised even himself, he made the decision to confront her, not to attack or accuse, but to speak his truth. He sat her down, looked her in the eyes, and calmly explained what had been happening to him, how her words had chipped away at his confidence, how her affection had become conditional, How staying had started to feel like slowly disappearing. This wasn't about bitterness. It was about boundaries. She scoffed. She downplayed his feelings. That part wasn't surprising. What was different this time was that he didn't flinch. He didn't beg or apologize for how he felt. For the first time, he stood firm, not with rage, but with resolve. And that in itself was revolutionary. For many older adults, especially men raised in eras where emotional restraint was the norm, choosing to walk away from a relationship that diminishes you is an act of tremendous courage. It's a declaration. I may be aging, but I am not invisible. He walked out of that house with no fireworks, no dramatic goodbye, just the quiet power of a man who finally chose himself. And though grief came, so did something else. Relief. That tightness in his chest eased. His breathing deepened. The air felt lighter. That decision didn't mark the end of his love story. It marked the beginning of one that truly mattered, the one he would write for himself. 6. Facing loneliness and rediscovering the self. The first few nights alone were the hardest. The house was quiet, too quiet. No background conversation, no rustling in the kitchen, no shared silence over morning coffee. Just the hum of solitude. For many older adults, this kind of stillness can feel like a void. But over time, that silence started to shift. It stopped feeling empty. It began to feel peaceful. He had spent so long bending to meet someone else's needs that he'd forgotten what it meant to live on his own terms. Now he had space, not just physically, but emotionally. And in that space, he began to rediscover forgotten joys. He reached out to old friends. He reopened a box of paints he hadn't touched in decades. He took long walks without needing to check in. There was no rush, no performance, no constant need for validation. He could move at his own pace again, one step at a time, in shoes that finally fit. Loneliness is real, and it's especially potent for seniors who fear isolation. But there's a difference between being alone and being lonely. Alone, he had room to breathe, reflect, and remember who he was before trying to become what someone else wanted. This period wasn't easy, but it was necessary. Healing often happens in quiet, uncelebrated moments, when you realize your own company is enough. In a culture that often glorifies youth and couples, we sometimes forget that self-renewal can happen at any age. You can be 67, 73, or 81 and still wake up to a life that surprises you. He hadn't just left a relationship, he'd come home to himself, and for the first time in years, that felt more than enough. 7. The valuable lessons learned from painful experience. Pain often leaves behind the clearest lessons. What began as heartbreak turned into one of the most important chapters of his life. Not because it was easy, but because it woke him up to truths he'd been avoiding for far too long. First, he learned that validation from others is fleeting, especially when it comes at the cost of your dignity. Real love doesn't ask you to shrink or perform. It invites you to stand tall, as you are, and be celebrated for it. Anything less isn't love. It's dependency disguised as affection. Second, he realized that self-respect is not optional. It's the bedrock of a meaningful life, especially as we age. He had spent too much time trying to meet someone else's standards, forgetting that his worth had already been proven through a life of resilience, hard work, and earned wisdom. He also came to understand that being alone is not failure. In fact, solitude gave him the clarity to hear his own voice again. It reminded him that joy can come from within, not from chasing someone else's approval. Most of all, he learned that you're never too old to start over. Not in your 60s, your 70s, or even beyond. Growth doesn't expire. In fact, it often deepens with age. The older we get, the more important it becomes to surround ourselves with relationships that honor who we are, not who we used to be or who someone else wants us to become. His pain became a teacher, and its lessons were hard-won but lasting. Through it all, he didn't just survive, he transformed. And that transformation didn't come from anyone else. It came from finally choosing himself. 8. Redefining love and aging. For most of our lives, love is something we chase, through passion, through partnership, through sacrifice. But as we age, love begins to reveal its truest form. It's not just about shared dinners or warm embraces. It's about mutual respect, emotional safety, and seeing one another clearly. And perhaps most importantly, it's about the relationship we hold with ourselves. After his painful experience, he began to understand that real love doesn't ask you to prove your worth. It honors the journey you've lived, the wrinkles earned through laughter and tears, the wisdom shaped by decades of experience, the quiet confidence that comes not from being perfect, but from being authentic. In a culture that often celebrates youth as the gold standard for romance, it's easy to forget that aging brings something even more powerful: depth. The kind of love that lasts in our later years doesn't hinge on appearances or excitement. It's rooted in connection, honesty, and presence. He no longer viewed growing older as a decline. He saw it as a refinement, a filtering of what truly matters. And love in this season of life became less about desire and more about dignity. True intimacy, he discovered, isn't about being everything to someone else. It's about being wholly yourself and still being embraced. This experience taught him that aging isn't about losing value. It's about finally claiming it. The greatest love story wasn't the one he had with someone younger. It was the one he began with himself, after years of neglecting his own heart. So if you've ever wondered whether love can grow stronger with age, the answer is yes, but only if it starts from within. Because the most enduring love is the kind that honors who you've become, not just who you were. This story isn't just about heartbreak, it's about awakening. It reminds us that love, at any age, should never come at the cost of our dignity, self-worth, or peace of mind. Especially as we grow older, we've earned the right to protect the very things we've spent a lifetime building: our values, our confidence, and our identity. If this man's journey has shown us anything, it's that it's never too late to walk away from something harmful and walk towards something healing. The years behind us are not a burden. They are the foundation of wisdom, and they deserve to be honored in the way we allow others to treat us. Whether you're 65, 75, or beyond, your story isn't over. In fact, this may be the chapter where you truly begin to live for yourself, not to meet someone else's expectations, but to finally embrace your own. So ask yourself, are you loving yourself as fiercely as you've loved others? If this message resonated with you, I encourage you to share your thoughts in the comments. What part of this story spoke to you the most? What have you learned about love, aging, or self-respect that you wish you'd known sooner? Please like this video if it inspired you, and share it with someone who might need this reminder. Let's build a space where older adults can feel seen, supported, and celebrated. And if you haven't already, subscribe and tap the notification bell so you don't miss future videos that speak directly to your experiences and your strength. Thank you for being here. Remember, growing older doesn't mean giving up. It means growing into yourself.